Welcome back to Interconnected. So, this is pretty special because, first of all, I'm so excited for our next guest, but also this will be our last airing for Interconnected with any more guests this year. So, we're excited that you're here and thank you so much for joining us. Our guest today is Dr. Heather McGuire, CEO of Adaptability Marketing. So I wanted to kind of just set the tone. And maybe you may have felt this way before, but have you ever felt the frustration of knowing your work could change countless lives, but feeling stuck on how to connect with the families or the people who need you the most? So, Heather, your
Yeah.
journey from earning a doctorate in educational psychology to becoming a board certified behavior analyst, uh, doctoral and leading adaptability marketing. So it uniquely positions you to understand and solve this challenge. So if you could trace back to a single moment or experience that shaped how you help therapy practices bridge that gap, what would that be? And how do you think that has influenced the way you guide others to make a greater impact?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's interesting. I have, worked as a behavior analyst. I've worked as a professor. And it's interesting. So many, whether it's like speech and language pathologists like yourself or, behavior analysts or therapists and whatnot, like who own their practice, that it's not like they necessarily know a ton about marketing, right? So, like, and initially as a clinician, I didn't either, right? So you just have to kind of go and I was the director of a few different behavior ABA companies, applied behavior analysis, and like you just have to kind of learn about business as you go because your training is clinical, right? But so the interesting thing for me was that I am married to a marketer, right? So I kind of like learned through him and whatnot, and I would like pull it into the work, the clinical work that I was doing, because as you oftentimes like. Even though initially I was doing more clinical work, once I was the director, I was doing more administrative work, and you just have to know those things, right? And so it just became really clear. Like I felt like I started to rely on the marketing knowledge that I was gaining, and that, generally speaking, a lot of the business owners and the leaders at these types of agencies, companies, etc., they don't necessarily know about marketing, right? And I think in the past, referrals would oftentimes come, they would maybe build relationships, like their marketing was like building relationships with the different insurance companies or schools or whatnot, right? But as time has gone on, that has become insufficient, right? So if you think about it, I think about like my kids, for example. So I have two kids, and recently, or in the last few years, I had to go find a place for them, like an orthodontic place, right? Even though it's a medical service that I'm looking for, where did I go? Right? I went on the internet, I went on Yelp, I Googled it and things like that, right? And so the way that parents are finding practices is through the internet and whatnot. And so, anyways, things have changed a lot. And so I just started to realize that a lot of these companies don't necessarily have, training in marketing, and they could benefit from it. And so eventually, and people would know, like, because, I've helped support Nate, my husband, as he's built his company, his agency, his marketing agency. He works in a totally different industrial marketing. People are like, oh, and so they would start to ask me questions and whatnot. So that kind of eventually just led to me realizing that I wanted to start a marketing agency specifically for clinical providers. So yeah, that's kind of the little background.
I love that. Well, I love that you have two marketers in the house now.
Yeah.
So your kids are already set up for success for marketing. But yeah, you mentioned something huge. It's like everything is shifting, especially surrounding marketing, and how we used to find businesses maybe previously isn't how it is today.
Yeah.
I think of myself, I go straight to Google. I will look at maybe how many stars the business has. And that leads me to actually my next question.
Yeah.
So, we're going to switch it up a little bit from the opposite side. If someone goes to a review, have you ever received a negative review? Anyone who's watching, and that may have stopped you in your tracks, especially maybe when you were first building your business. And one that made you wonder whether you should defend yourself, explain yourself, or just let it go. So, this is a moment that can really feel personal and even discouraging. So, I would love to have your insight, Heather, with your experience guiding therapy practices. How do you and your team turn these challenging moments into opportunities to build trust and create deeper, more meaningful connections with families rather than letting them feel like setbacks?
Yeah, it's interesting as so clinical providers, they can receive this feedback in multiple ways, right? So you mentioned a review, but actually, one of the things that comes to mind, people are sometimes kind of nervous. So, part of marketing can be like a presence on social media, right? So, you think about who are like the target, the ideal clients that you want to work with, right? And then you think about like the platforms that they're on, right? So, let's say, you know, let's say like in your previous roles when you were a speech and language pathologist working at a clinic, right? You think about like those families, where are they hanging out, right? So maybe, for example, they're hanging out on Instagram, right? And so one great way to build credibility with those potential clients or their families is by posting on Instagram, right? And just giving them like little tidbits of helpful information, not advertising to them necessarily. Advertising has its own place, but more just like, hey, here's helpful information. Well, sometimes what happens is that somebody might comment on your post and their comment might be negative, right? So we give guidance to our clients like, okay, how do you deal with a negative comment, right? So one way to deal with it, first of all, any sort of comment that is not appropriate, those are the comments that you would just remove. But it can be tempting to just remove any sort of negative comment that people make. And that's not necessarily like the right thing to do. So typically, like if somebody leaves a negative comment, let's say on your post, then and we would be coaching our clients to be like in the comments on a daily basis, because you don't want it to be there unaddressed for like a long period of time. But you acknowledge whatever situation they whatever their comments, and especially they might be it could be different. It could just be somebody on the internet, or it could be a family that has actually worked with you. But you kind of like empathize and acknowledge where they're coming from. But then, as quickly as possible, you try to pull the conversation off of the platform, right? So, oh, I'm going to message you directly about this, right? So it doesn't become this like back and forth, dialogue, etc. So that's how we tell our clients to deal with like negative comments online. In terms of like a Yelp, like let's call like a Google or a Yelp review, generally there's like lots of different ways to build reviews. And you have to probably don't have time to go into all the ethical components. So you have to keep in mind like the ethical guidelines that, whatever clinical area or specialty, you're going to have their own set of ethical guidelines according to the code that, code or codes that you work under. But what you do, like let's say a client has left and you do like a post exit interview with them, and you ask them like, you solicit feedback from them, right? Generally, what we recommend is like after you solicit the feedback, and the feedback is super important and helpful because then you know how to change whatever you want to change in your practice based upon the experience of like a former client, let's say, right? But also, so for the clients who have like let's say they have a lot of concerns. What we would recommend is that like somebody in leadership follow up directly with the person, okay, and to discuss those things and try to make things and smooth things out as much as possible and figure out like what went wrong, right? But for the clients who have a lot of positive things to say, we want them to take that into consideration as well. But also, you think about like then those are the people who you want to like point like and make it super easy like hey, and you don't ask we don't tell you don't ask them to leave you a 5-star review. I would definitely don't say that, but like you could say like hey, we would love for you to leave us an honest review, and you give them the link and then they can leave it. Because other times if you kind of just let your reviews build organically, then sometimes what happens is like the really I don't know, negative Nancy's, if you will, they're the ones that are going to leave the reviews and not the people always who have the positive. And obviously, you're not going to stop anybody from leaving a review on a platform like Yelp or whatever, but definitely you want to make sure too that you're capturing those positive, the people who, the clients and whatnot who have those positive experiences. You want them hopefully to be able to leave you that honest review. And also, you want to address whatever challenges somebody has told you about. So I don't know, those two different angles, but it kind of deals with that topic.
Yeah, I love your insight. I didn't even think about Instagram, and but you're right because I've come across different conversation feeds just in terms of when I'm researching different um, information. And you're right, like sometimes there is different comments and different things, even here on LinkedIn is another space. So I think that's great insight that you provided, especially when it comes to maybe there is room to not necessarily maybe delete um, the comment, but maybe there is room to have some type of dialogue and then attempt to move it off if it's becoming too much of a back and forth. So that leads me actually into my next question is, so as a parent, I'm a parent. We have two girls, and I know how overwhelming it can be to navigate lots of information about what's best for either one of my children, especially when it comes to their development. And if you're watching and you're a speech language pathologist, or maybe you're some type of therapist or work around developmental milestones, you may understand too in terms of just when it comes to your child, you're always trying to make sure that they have exactly what they need at whatever stage that they're at. So I wanted to ask you how they're with your unique expertise and as a
Yeah.
parent, how does strategic marketing become more than just a tool, but it becomes a bridge that connects the therapy practices and pediatric therapy practices with families and showing them the value of the care they provide and empower them to take the next step?
Yeah. Well, first off, if you think about like I love what like I think that the question is great. Um, so for the people out there that like let's say they like work for some sort of like pediatric therapy clinic or they're an owner or whatnot, obviously like all of the work that they do directly impacts their clients. But one of the cool things about marketing, right, so if you think about marketing and like it gives you the opportunity to think about who like your prospective clients, right? So not just your current ones today, but the ones that you might have in the future. But also there's a lot of it gives you the opportunity to provide resources for that group of people. Again, some of them may become your clients eventually, but others won't, right? But you can create like helpful tools for them, whether you're doing like a blog, right? Or whether you put together different like PDFs, like worksheets, or different things that they can use. Like, for example, like I think about this. So as a behavior analyst, one of the things that we would help families with is potty training, right? So, specifically working with kids with disability. I mean, potty training is hard no matter what, right? But for our parents out there who have kids with disabilities, it's even harder, right? And so a tool though might be like if somebody's Googling, like, how do I potty train? I have a kid with autism and how do I potty train them, right? You could like the ABA company, let's say, could create a tool like a PDF resource that gives some of the strategies that they use with their clients, right? And as a free resource. And the cool thing is that it has the potential to help so many people. And some of those people might then choose them as a therapeutic provider, right? They might be like searching for one, or eventually they would be searching for one. But even like apart from that, it gives that resource out, right? um so that's one cool thing. But I think like going back to kind of like the I'm a mom too, and like just kind of the insecurities specifically, and I'm sure that this is true for parents, but I'm just thinking about it through the lens of being a mom guilt is totally a thing, right? And yeah, uh, I would just say that providing kind of resources and tools as it relates to mindset as well, right? So giving parents um, like the confidence to kind of make some of those decisions, if that makes sense. Looks like Jordan has dropped off for a second. I'm going to go ahead and kind of like talk about the next question that she had asked. So one of the questions that she asked was related to like a key insight that I've taken from my clinical practice and how do I use it in my marketing agency. And so I would say that the use of data. So clinicians, whether they're speech and language pathologists, behavior analysts, etc., like we all love to use data to help measure the progress of our clients. And so I like to bring that into marketing as well. So I would never like have the clients who work with me, like we do different marketing activities, and then we measure the effectiveness of those marketing activities with data. What I'm going to do is go ahead and give out my information. Again, I'm Dr. Heather McGuire. My agency is Adaptability Marketing. We specialize in working with pediatric therapists and we help them with their marketing. And you can find me on my website, adaptabilitymarketing.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Adaptability Marketing, as well as on Instagram at Adaptability Marketing. And actually, on my website, on the homepage of my website, Adaptability Marketing, I have a free guide that you can download that has all the basics that clinical, those of who are either leaders at clinical agencies, like whether it's a behavior analyst, a speech and language pathologist, an occupational therapist, download of that resource there.
This is one of those things you can't make this stuff up. You just have to. Life happens. So our power went out, but we're gonna continue.
Oh goodness. Okay, well let me tell you what I said. I went to the question and then I answered the question about like what I can pull, what I pulled from my own practice into the marketing, and I specifically talked about data, the use of data. So as a clinician, I use data to measure the progress of my clients like that, and so clinicians value data, but in marketing, I always make sure like with the clients that I work with that we're measuring our marketing, because I think sometimes marketing, people are concerned marketing could just be fluffy, right? And so that's not the type of marketing I'm interested in, and I'm going to take very serious like the resources that are allocated. Clinicians, they don't typically, these practices, the it's hard to make a profit as an owner of a practice at any company, but especially, right? And so if they're going to entrust me with resources from their agency, I'm going to be very strategic, and then also we're going to put data behind and show the progress and the measuring of the progress.
So, what would you say if someone's getting started with their private practice, or maybe they are just shifting how they're doing their business. When is a good time to get started with, maybe there's a resource that you have, or just a conversation? What would you say to those people that are like, I feel like I need to be doing more and I'm not getting, maybe they were getting results previously and maybe those same strategies may not be working now. So what would you say to
Yeah. Well,
them?
first off, I'm happy to talk to anybody. I do like a free initial consultation with, like let's say you're just starting. I would still love to talk to you. Maybe now isn't the time to hire an agency. It kind of just depends on, your strategy. I've worked with people who are just starting, but also people, who have a more, let's say, a more mature agency, like I talk in terms of behavior analytic agencies, but practices or whatever. So I can work with anybody, but I think like I'd be happy to talk to anybody. And you can book a meeting with me right through, if you go to adaptabilitymarketing.com and go to the contact us, you can book a meeting with me. I'd be happy to talk to you about where you're at and like what strategies you could be doing. And then also the resource, and I did talk about it a little bit, but on the homepage of my website, there's a PDF resource, and it kind of it goes through 10 things to do and to think about for marketing. And so even if you don't, decide that adaptability marketing, like that might not be in your cards right now, right? But if you get started, it'll get you kind of pushed in the right direction to think about marketing, because really you have to think about marketing from the beginning, right? So yeah.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I am so grateful for you taking the time to share all of the wealth of knowledge that you have. And yes, I'm looking forward to continuing to follow your work. And everyone that has been tuning in, you have Heather's information. And thank you again, Heather, for taking the time to be on Interconnect.